us now, Democratic Congresswoman Madeleine Dean of Pennsylvania. She, of course, served as an impeachment manager during Trump's second impeachment trial, is a member of the Judiciary Committee, and someone we have turned to on many days to talk to about the January 6th insurrection. I think the Trump speech is relevant in the context of the radicalization of his party and his supporters, and the current Homeland Security law enforcement bulletin on the books warning of domestic violent extremism connected to the lie about the election. And I wonder at this point what you do about that.
Well, thank you for having me, Nicole. And yes, the former guy's speech is relevant, but I know you struggle with this, how to make sure we balance it, that we don't give more and more oxygen to the set of lies that wound up with an insurrection, Americans attacking Americans. His speech is dangerous. It's sickening, frankly. And even more troubling are all of those around him, elected leaders, and now many in his base, who are complicit in these lies. You know, we're elected officials. We are here to tell the truth to our constituents and hopefully lift others. That's what the Democrats are doing. So I want to be careful not to focus too much on a failed president who spoke nothing but lies for the 4 years that he was in office and continues to do that, all the while stoking dangerous disinformation.
And I guess the safer place to land in terms of covering what's happening in sort of the complete abdication to do what you're describing, to govern and lead, is to cover the Republican Party. And some of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle are of interest to the new Select Committee. Let me show you. My colleague Casey Hunt asked Congressman Benny Thompson about how they will sort of follow the facts if they lead them to current Republican members. Let's watch. We'll talk on the other side.
Sir, if you find that members of Congress did, in fact, aid members of this mob, this violent mob, either ahead of time or during, what is the remedy for that? What should happen to those members of Congress?
Well, there are several remedies potentially. You could refer that information to the Department of Justice. You could refer it to our Ethics Committee. But I would hope, even though we come sometime to this institution, United States House of Representatives with different opinion, we should never foster the notion that just because I didn't get my way in an election, it is time that we destroy the institution. So our goal with this committee is to preserve our democratic government as we see it now.
Just listening to it has, nothing public facing has really commenced, but the stakes are nothing less than that, to hold accountable and to get to the bottom of this historic attack on our democracy. Are you confident that it will succeed?
I have great confidence in the Select Committee. I'm delighted with Chairman Benny Thompson. You know, sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. So let's shine sunlight on the facts and circumstances of 1/6. This committee is armed and able to do that. We'll see if the Republicans bother to populate the rest of the committee. But we will get to the facts and circumstances and let them, let the chips fall where they may. Why do you think Mr. McCarthy is against everything having to do with looking into this? Is it possible that he's afraid of that which will expose him and many of his colleagues? You know, the Democrats are here. It's important that we have the Select Committee, but I'd love to talk about what we are actually doing. We passed the American Rescue Plan. This week, July 15th, will be the beginning of the expanded child tax credit, which is really a tax cut for working families that will be generationally transformative. In my own district, on July 15th and then every 15th thereafter, 40% of children living in poverty in my district will be lifted out of that. That's what Democrats are about. We're about building infrastructure, growing jobs, and of course, doing the important oversight of, for God's name, an insurrection. I wanted to just tell you, Nicole, the day of the insurrection, when I was in the holding room, you have to remember, originally for the first several hours, we saw no TVs. We had no information on who was in the building, how many people were in the building, or what was going on. And I remember the buzz around insurrection. I literally looked up the word insurrection, having never been in one before, having studied them in history, having read about them in other precarious countries. But I had to look it up. And then when I got to a TV, I saw it was actually true. Americans were attacking our democracy. They were killing people. They were beating police officers. And all the while, we have Republicans who don't want to investigate it, don't want to fund the Capitol Police, don't want to move this country forward.
I mean, just going back to the day is so haunting, and it did not, at the time of the attack, have any partisan feel to it. And I'm open to the fact that that may turn out not to be the case, but there were harrowing images of Democratic members of Congress and Republican members of Congress. They all were under attack. But I think the fact remains that as soon as the threat cleared, as soon as Secret Service rushed Mike Pence from the chamber, as soon as the insurrection was put down, hundreds of Republicans, hundreds of your colleagues voted to overturn the results of the election. And I wonder if you worry that this anti-democratic commitment, this commitment to the lies and the disinformation is hardwired now.
Oh, I fear that it is. I'm very fearful for our country and for our democracy, for the very things you said in the setup, that we do know there is still online chatter and conversations. We need to fund our Capitol Police so that they can be as well informed as possible and prepared. We don't think this is going away. We know that. I don't understand how people don't want to absolutely get to the bottom of it, fully fund Capitol Police, and move our country forward. This is frighteningly getting hardwired in some people. I participated in a lot of events around the 4th of July and engaged in one conversation. Mostly it was all very positive conversation, but one conversation where people in my own area were continuing that disinformation. We owe it to our constituents to tell them the truth. It's very frightening that this is getting baked in. So all the more reason that we have to do everything in our power to grow our majority, frankly, to make sure that we have greater majority in the Senate, so that we can start moving some of these things through, like H.R. 1, like protecting our voting rights. The president's coming to Pennsylvania tomorrow, to Philadelphia. I'll have a chance to be with him around the issue of voting rights. You have been talking about 48 states, 389 proposed pieces of legislation, and a Supreme Court that just stripped out more of the Voting Rights Act. We have to do everything in our power to make sure that this president is successful, and that Democrats govern for the people, and do everything we can to not condemn those who believe the lie, but to try to educate those against the lie.
Well, if the timing works out, I'd love to touch base tomorrow after that speech and hear your review of it. Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. When we return, the final days of the former guy's time in office and the top advisors who wouldn't or couldn't or didn't tell him no.